Hello, everyone. My name is Gian-Carlo Carra. I am the city councilor for Ward 9, and I am the candidate, one of the many candidates for looking to get reelected in Ward 9, your candidate for reelection in October 18. One of the things we're doing this campaign is really talking about what's happening in Calgary and the critical moment we're sitting in as a city. And we're doing this through a series of conversations. This is the second one. The first one was about the arts sector, and I had an amazing conversation with Alex Sarian. And this next one is about something that's near and dear to the heart of Ward 9, and that's the explosion of the microbrewing industry. And we have three amazing microbrewing breweries represented in this conversation today. We have High Line, we have Annex Ale Project, and we have Dandy, all super well known in the brewery flats and the barley belt areas. So I'd like to just sort of jump into this conversation, but I think before I do that, I want to acknowledge two things. The first one is I want to acknowledge that we are all treaty people. This is an age of truth and reconciliation. And as we sit down and conduct our business as Calgarians, I think it's important to understand that we are on this land because of a treaty that was signed, and we are committed to building community as has been done since time immemorial. The Blackfoot people, the Stoney Nakoda people, the Tsuut'ina people, and the Métis with their long history on this land, urban Aboriginals from across Turtle Island, and now people from all over the world building community on this land. The other thing I want to note is that this is not a very diverse panel. We are sort of trying to move away as a civilization from manels, a bunch of white guys talking, because we are a much more diverse community than that. But that's how the cookie crumbled today. There are some amazing women who are doing brewing, particularly Andrew from Annex Ale. His partner is Erica, who I actually know better than Andrew. She was unable to join us today, but why don't I throw it over to you, Andrew, and just have you start us off and tell us a little about the Annex Ale Project and what your connection is to this movement that's occurring throughout North America, but specifically here in Calgary.
Thanks so much, GC. And yeah, thanks for acknowledging Erica. I'm pretty much just a stand-in today. I'd be remiss if I didn't say that she's doing most of the heavy lifting in our business. So Annex has been around since the middle of 2017. We're just 42nd and 1st Street, kind of over by the old Safeway distribution warehouse. We focus very heavily on North American style beers. We really like making as many different styles of beer as we possibly can. We try and do a new beer every couple of weeks. And really, we're just trying to elevate the entire craft beer experience, make it quite a bit more inclusive for the people in Calgary. And as such, we also have a soda component for people that don't drink. So yeah, we're happy to exist in this community and thrilled to be part of this conversation.
Right on. Well, thanks for joining us. Before I turn it over to our next brewer, I'm just going to note that another favorite of mine is Outcast in the Barley Belt. They did not, we didn't get them onto the panel, but they were kind enough to drop some beers off at campaign headquarters here. So I'm drinking one of their hazy dry hop pale ales. This is called Less Capitalism, More Nihilism. But let's go over to Graham from High Line. Graham, why don't you tell us a little bit about High Line in the heart of Brewery Flats?
Sure thing, and thanks, GC, for having us. It's a great opportunity. We started here in 2016. We were one of the early. Well, all three of us were early in the game back in the day when there wasn't really anyone local to ask for help. Our only help was the internet to really get things going. Totally different scene now. You've got hundreds in Alberta. We started small. We started with a 30-seat tap room right in the heart of Inglewood, just a little east of Spolumbos, with 8 taps, and then we went to 10, and then 12, and then during COVID, we had the opportunity to get the bay next door. Money was really tight. We had always intended on expanding and renovating quickly to reopen, but COVID kind of gave us a year and a half to do everything ourselves. So I know how to frame now. My taproom manager, Jeff, who is a great addition to the team. He and I built the bar. So I really, through this whole pandemic, I've really tried to find the silver lining in things and stay optimistic and as happy as possible. And those were a few small wins in an otherwise really difficult year and a half. We reopened in stages, sort of between August and I guess June 18th or whenever the last one was, or July 1st. We're 110 seats now. We've got a huge expanded patio that went into place very quickly, thanks to the city. That was a really big help for our business. And we're just happy to have everyone back and serving up 19 different styles of beer, and a food program that is well paired for beer. We've got some hot dogs and some charcuterie, and people are really enjoying it. I'm happy to see smiles on people's faces again.
Right on. And moving to our last brewer with us, Benjamin. Dandy is one of, in my mind, one of the granddaddies of the scene. Why don't you tell us about your journey through craft brewing?
Yeah, we started way back in 2014, right when the province sort of started allowing small breweries to exist, and yeah, we always thought it'd be better to be first than good, so we just did everything we could to get rolling, assuming there was a million more groups of folks in their garages, homebrewers and stuff who had the same idea. Andrew is actually probably one of the first people we spoke to in the brewing community. He was at Village and showed us around and helped us sort of make some plans as we were trying to sort of navigate this world that, as Graham alluded to, didn't really exist at that time. There was Village, Big Rock, Wild Rose, Alley Cat. They're all pretty big operations, not much little guys trying to get stuff going. So, and at that time, due to zoning, there weren't a lot of options of places to open breweries. So we were nestled away in the Airways Industrial Park, in probably the closest industrial building to a residential area in Vista Heights, just up in the Northeast. It was just 1,000 square feet and produced very small volumes of beer. And we outgrew that pretty quick, and zoning had changed in the city, and we knew we could sort of start looking more centrally, and Ramsey had always stood out as a community that we really felt would sort of embrace something like we're doing, a heritage community. And as everyone knows, the Molson factory, the former Molson brewery, former Cross Brewery, is not too far away. So we really wanted to be there, sort of the heart of Calgary brewing history. So we moved down to Ramsey and opened in April 2018. So we've just been sort of making beers and having fun.
So, I mean, this is an industry that exploded, and this is one of the legacies, really, in Calgary and in Alberta of the NDP government. Like, this was something that they pulled out the stops to make happen, is my impression. Am I wrong in that? And
I mean, the ball started rolling a little bit previous to that. I think there wasn't a lot of thought put into the liquor licensing, and the fact that Alberta was really the only jurisdiction in North America, if not the world, that had minimum production values attached to the production licenses. So it was 2013 when those laws changed, and then definitely there was a ton of support when the NDP came in to identify it as an agricultural end user, that this isn't just great for communities to have gathering places and bring back some heritage industry, but also we're using, barley that's grown right here in Alberta.
Yeah, I found it was very advantageous when we first started, because the NDP had put a bunch of tax advantages in for really small brewers. And that effectively gave all of us the beachhead that we needed to be able to get on our feet at the time. Even though a lot of those policies have reverted back to where they have been before. There are far more brewing licenses that are issued now than there were before the NDP started. So we certainly credit them with helping our industry out immensely.
And on our side, the sliding scale of provincial markup has been very helpful. So the smaller you are, the less markup you pay for a keg of beer, and that really helps the little guy, especially when you're starting up. There's an awful lot to pay for, and every dollar counts. So that was helpful, and continues to be helpful.
So I was like sitting in my office at City Hall when I started to get these delegations of interesting guys, showing up saying, "Hey, we're going to open a brewery, and we need some help with the zoning. We need some help with the business licensing. We want to have a tap room." And I remember just being like, "This sounds really cool, but what is all of this?" How much of this? I mean, like, how much? I guess there's two questions right there. Is the first one I want to ask is, obviously this was something that was happening in other parts of North America, and we came to the table. Were we late to the table? We were right at the beginning of the wave. Where were we sort of as craft brewing emerged throughout North America? And then the second question is, how did the city sort of start to really help you guys by creating the opportunity for these breweries with tasting rooms? I mean, this was unheard of like 7-8 years ago.
I can certainly speak a bit to that. I'm from Vermont, which is sort of it's one of the meccas for IPA. It's a really like the Alchemist, Heady Topper. I mean, there are hundreds of amazing IPAs coming out of Vermont and have been since sort of the mid 2000s. You're about 15 years behind here, mostly due to the minimum production rules. But in the past, I personally used to plan trips around what kind of beers I could get. I don't do that anymore. Calgary's got an amazing beer selection. I go to Open Vine here in Inglewood quite often, and it blows me away how much local stuff they're bringing in. There's a brewery up in Edmonton making Goods, which is a really strange, wild yeast Belgian style. That's just amazing. And then to go to the second part of the question, GC, you were very helpful early on, as was the city, trying to figure out how to put an industrial space. So what's behind me is light industrial adjacent, but right behind that is residential property. So how to fit those two together. And it took a lot of negotiation or more discussion with the city. And eventually, because Inglewood is zoned to allow for local distribution or local production and manufacture, we were able to get this space zoned for a brewery. And I think now it happens even easier.
You referenced Spalumbo's, and Spalumbo's is another example of that sort of like local production, because right behind their deli is a federally inspected sausage plant with like really state-of-the-art stuff, and they moved from down the street to their current location. It's a great thing, that sort of like live, work, play, make thing. Andrew, I'm going to ask you the same question, but before I do, I just want to ask you what you're drinking.
I'm drinking Ford Progress Pale Ale. It's it's near and dear to my heart. It's kind of the beer that keeps the lights on here. And yeah, I would have to say it's probably our most dialed in beer, just from having, obsessed over it and tweaked it so many times. So to answer the question, I remember, I can remember back when I was working at Village, going to Dandy and seeing their little tiny tap room and having a great time there. And it was unlike anything that you could experience in the city. And when we were setting out to make Annex, what it is today, we toured around the West Coast, and we wanted to bring the West Coast aesthetic, the brewing style, everything we could to Calgary, and that included the tap room. And to be able to go into the Manchester Industrial Park, which was zoned for like light industrial and very little commercial, and trying to bring like a restaurant and tap room aspect to that. I think the wheels had been in motion already by the time that we got there. But, the city was still pretty new to it at the time, back in like 2016 when we were doing our applications. So it was really interesting, working with our planner, having to explain conceptually what we're trying to do and talk about, you talk about the fire rating, and, we have essentially an open concept to our brewery. If you wanted to, you could just walk right in the back. And yeah, it took a little while for people to wrap their heads around it, but yeah, the city worked really well with us, and we were able to open our little tiny brewery, and we've expanded a couple of times since that. It's been it gets easier every single time.
Awesome. Ben, you got a story to tell?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I remember when we started the first stand, even up in the light industrial, there was definitely a lot of calls to 311 trying to figure out what we're zoned at, what we could do, and all that. And even at that point, we were always pretty impressed with how open the city was to talk to us and work with us, and just provide us with other phone numbers we could call of other departments who might be able to help us. And yeah, that was a ton of experience. I was an English teacher. I definitely had never done anything that involved permitting or anything like that, so it was a learning experience. And then as Andrew mentioned, with wheels sort of turning as soon as the brewery started opening, in that sort of 2015, 2016 time, was when we started our move to Ramsey. And there was definitely some changes in zoning to allow tasting rooms with breweries, but it had affected some of the stuff we had pre-applied for as far as an actual restaurant space connected to a brewery. And GC, I don't know if you remember, but probably my greatest memory, good or bad, of this entire journey of being a brewery was calling the city to get our business license and finding out a week before we were supposed to open that we weren't zoned correctly anymore because of the changes at the city. And I remember, curling up in a ball on my office floor, calling everyone in every level of government. But the city was great. You put me in touch with the right people, and we were able to explain the situation, and the city really came to the table and made sure we didn't slow down and made sure we were open on schedule. And that's really been since day one, which talking to friends with breweries and other jurisdictions out east and stuff, that the city doesn't always have that same desire to sort of slow down and say, okay, what do you need, what can we do? And there's a solution to a problem, not a dead end. So yeah, it's been interesting.
I mean, I'll tell you, in my 10 plus years now at City Hall, we've really sort of shifted the focus of the city from sort of a bureaucracy that's there to sort of preside over conflict to a problem solver that's there to sort of like help innovate and get places. And we're not all the places that we're going to be. And I think to get into a moment, we're going to talk about how COVID has almost accelerated some of the innovation that we've seen. And we'll talk about that in a minute. Before I do, I just want to ask you, Ben, what are you drinking?
I'm drinking the Dandy Light Lager. It's 4% and light and delicious. Very easy drinking on a sunny day.
Right on. So I quickly came up to speed with the whole craft brewing thing because it was very clear that this was happening. I pride myself on Ward 9 as being sort of the Brooklyn of Calgary, a city within a city, great neighborhoods connected to working landscapes, places that built the city and that are actually driving the emergence of the next Calgary. The Calgary that's not just an oil and gas mecca, but is a diversified economy, celebrating a great Western Canadian life in an increasingly crazy world. One of the theses that I absolutely love, and this sort of like came into being with me just as the craft brewing industry was rising up, was that the question is, how did Calgary become the city that it is? And there's an amazing guy at the University of Calgary, a local historian, who talked about what his thesis was. And I think that the story we always told ourselves as a city was that we became a city because we had a fort, or we became a city because the railroad came through. And of course, every place in the West that had a fort and then was lucky enough to get the railroad thought they were going to become the next big city. And so that's not really the answer. And then the other answer is that, well, it's because the oil industry called this place home. But why did the oil industry call Calgary home? And the thesis from coming out of the University of Calgary, and I'm spacing on the professor's name, it's not Max Ferrand, it's his contemporary, but he said it's two reasons. Number one, it's because we started brewing beer here. And that was the first incidence in the mega region where instead of shipping products, raw material out, we brought raw material in and we created a value-added product. And that actually created in Inglewood a center of commerce and culture that really started to catch fire and give Calgary the weight necessary to become the city that the oil industry would, of course, gravitate towards being its headquarters when it was clear that there was oil in them their hills. The other thing, of course, was that inland port function where the CP Rail built the Ogden shops, because this was the center of the mega region. This was the inland port. This is the place where everything came in to ship out, which is part of the story of barley and all of that as well. So I'm very gratified as we start to re-envision what Calgary is, that it seems to be led as it was in its first phase with brewing, now with the microbrewers who are sort of creating in the neighborhoods that are creating the next economy, that new Calgary. And so I guess my question to you is, how does that thesis strike you? Are you guys ready to take on the responsibility of saving Calgary?
It makes me feel a little tingly there, GC.
Softball. That's a softball.
Yeah, well, I think you look into other cities and seeing like the draw to craft breweries, and definitely what we've seen in Calgary is, they're gathering places and they're meeting places, and that's where sort of ideas grow from. Most brewers, are in it for the craft, and that sort of carries over to arts and everything, and tend to have sort of that appreciation for that world as well. And I know breweries, big and small, we all love taking part in art or cultural events and stuff best we can. It just works, it just fits, and we have these great spaces that people can meet at, or live music can happen at, or art can be displayed at. And that's really unique when you think of something like even a restaurant that opens and says, this is our concept, so this is our aesthetic, and this is what we're going to do. We as breweries, we're breweries first, and we're focused on getting people in and enjoying the product we're giving them, but the space is still there to sort of gather and thrive.
So that gives me a nice sort of something I'm planning on running a very event focused campaign, because the traditional door knocking wasn't something that we were even thinking we might not be able to do. Thankfully, vaccinations have caught up, and hopefully the Delta variant doesn't crush us, and we're able to continue to open up. And you're seeing that on the patios, and it's amazing. But one of the things we're going to do is we're going to do a bike tour of the Barley Belt and the Brewery Flats later in the season, closer to the election. So we're looking forward on rolling up with a bunch of neighborhood focused people looking at rising together. Let's talk about how we went from, I think, slow motion innovating and changing the bylaw pretty quickly and setting it up for success for microbrewers, to COVID striking, which of course brought a lot of negativity, but there was also a lot of innovation. I mean, the fact that we're just having this conversation online is like one of those things where we just we just leapt ahead. No one thought we could do this. Oh, you can't go online. And then all of a sudden we had to, we were online in 10 seconds. There was a lot of innovation that sort of emerged. Why don't we talk about some of that, and, patios, the fact that we have to be outside, and we've innovated on patio space. You've got a huge patio, Graham. Why don't you talk to us about that side of things really quickly? And before you do, tell us what you're drinking.
Sure. Yeah, I'm drinking our Seaward Goza. It's got some kelp and coriander, a little bit of salt. It's slightly sour, and it's low alcohol, which is better in the summer, I think. COVID, yeah. I am very much looking forward to a period of time that I hope is for decades, that nothing changes on a daily or weekly basis. The need for myself or anyone involved in this business to pivot on a seemingly daily basis was exhausting. You never really knew what was going to happen. You never know when the shutdown's coming or when you're reopening, and you have to hire and unfortunately fire and build patios and find patio tables or umbrellas. I had to source 8 umbrellas that are the same color. That normally wouldn't be a problem, but during COVID, it's a big challenge to make that happen in 3 days. So yeah, it has been exhausting. It has kept me very busy for the last year and a half. I will look back on it feeling as though we did some good during COVID, but I will not miss it one bit.
I understand. Anyone else want to jump in on the patio question about how it used to be a big deal to get a patio, and now we're sort of like bending over backwards to make that happen?
You know, I'm sitting in the tap room. I'm overlooking our expanded COVID patio right now, and there are people outside sitting enjoying beers underneath a tent on a slanted asphalt parking lot, and they came here intentionally, and I'm like so grateful for it. And it was so, I mean, the entire theme for us during COVID, it was just so nice to see how quickly the city can move and make these changes that are so impactful on our businesses to try and keep our doors open when they need to, or when the city needs to. So yeah, we're just very thankful that to see that sort of movement happen that quickly.
Ben, you also have a huge patio now. Used to be a parking lot. Somehow parking's less important. Patio seems to be a lot more important to all of us, which is a great sort of evolution in our value set.
Yeah, it's been crazy. Like when we first opened, it was, I don't know if anyone remembers our previous patio, which was really just, you know, sidewalk in front of our doors that we could fit a few benches on. But yeah, the move by the city to sort of streamline that process and be much more open and, you know, be open to the idea that, you know, we don't necessarily want people driving down to come drink bars. So the less drink beers. So the less parking, the better. The patios are great. And it's wild. I've been sort of doing anecdotally keeping track of people's comments, but I hear more than anything after this, like how great the patios have been. If the city could keep this up and sort of prioritize that outdoor space instead of prioritizing parking or, you know, roads that are 10 lanes wide, and just that it feels like this a bigger metropolitan and such a more inviting downtown to be everywhere where there's these huge patios and people are comfortable.
And thank you to GC and the city for making these patios or for extending the patios until the end of October. That's pretty forward thinking, and it will be hugely beneficial to all of us. So thank you.
We're going to get Danish with it. I think at some point we're going to be sitting under blankets with maybe a heater and stuff, and it's just going to become an expanded part of our culture. And it's very exciting that, you know, unfortunately something like COVID has sort of like accelerated the game in that regard. Another big thing, of course, for all the breweries, and especially during COVID, is active transportation. Is the idea that, you know, people aren't just going for a beer. John Holt, who lives in the feed mill just down the street from Dandy, you know, one of the things he talks about is just how healthy the customers are. Like, you know, you don't see vomit, people aren't fighting. This isn't like a traditional bar scene. This is like wholesome people bike riding together and having a good time and fellowship and drinking. Talk to us about the role that active transportation plays in the culture that's emerging here.
For us, active transportation has always been a gigantic thing. We've always really encouraged people to bike to Annex and in and around the Barley Belt. You know, my partner Erica did a lot of work to try and get what we call the Sluice Way built, the mixed-use pathway down to 42nd, which has been a huge thing for active transport in our neighborhood. And like I use it all the time because 42nd, as I know you know, it's terrifying to bike on sometimes. It seems like there are some drivers that have their own set of rules that they like to enforce. So it certainly feels safer, and we're a lot happier knowing that our customers are safer. And we've been thrilled to see that the city's even expanded a lot of the active transport during COVID, shutting down some lanes for cars and adding bike lanes like Memorial and Eva Drive. And I hope that will continue seasonally.
Dandy benefit. I want to talk about the 42nd Avenue multi-use path, also known as the Sluice Way, but I also want to just note that Dandy benefits from
The 11th Street.
the permanent on-street adaptive multi-use path, as we're calling them right now. And then of course, High Line has the 8th Avenue cycleway, where we've basically taken an entire car-oriented residential street and made infrastructure investments to slow down the traffic and just say this is really about bikes moving along there, and that gives great access to, and they're all connected. But Shushway is an interesting one. Why do you call it that?
So Kevin Schlaw, he's huge proponent of both active transport and microbreweries. He's a very vocal and active person, and he really got the ball rolling on this, and he helped immensely, and he's just all around great guy.
He works up in Highfield, and several years ago I said, I'm going to start every Friday doing a bicycle commute with one of my constituents, and I'm going to ride to work with them and see what they're experiencing to sort of just try and get a sense. And Kevin was not one of my constituents. He was one of, I think he was one of Evan Woolley's and then Councillor Farkas's constituents, but he rode through Ward 9 and he worked in Ward 9. And so I rode with him, and I realized that 42nd Avenue was really a missing link. It's a river to river connection. And he was very instrumental in getting the whole Barley Belt on the idea that river to river connection that connects to the Great Trail and brings people to the heart of the Barley Belt was really a step one in that whole process. And based on the lobbying from the community, I was able to convince council counter-cyclically to just come up with $5 million to help build that piece of cycle infrastructure. So that's a great success story. Do you want to talk a little bit about yours, Ben? Because
yeah, the 11th Street, the railway cutoff. Once we moved in to Ramsey, we really started to notice that sort of that CP overpass between Inglewood and Ramsey was sort of this cutoff point. There's a few breweries on the other side, and people would make their way down, but it was a pretty busy street, and with the sidewalk up above and sort of dark and not super inviting, and the road down below, it really turned people sort of off the idea that there was more down in Ramsey. So since that came in last year on COVID, I know a few of us businesses probably kept kept it top of mind for UGC, but once that came in, we just saw an instant change in the way people were sort of migrating between Ramsey and Inglewood, and it became this great connector for active transportation, which is great, and we see even more bikes than we did before, which is awesome. We have a nice little corner there with Calgary Heritage Roasters, and they have beautiful patio, and Neverland and 88 just down the way. So it's really, we feel a lot more like, quick ride over to High Line doesn't seem like, this huge, venture across town anymore.
I'm very pleased with how that's turned out. And of course, 8th Avenue connects right to the multi-use path. The big connection that we need to build now is when you get to the end of or when you get to the end of 11th Street there, you're at the Crossroads Market. Yeah. And we need, eventually there's going to be a multi-use path along the Green Line. And so that will connect to 42nd, but we also need some kind of dedicated cycle track that takes you right through the Barley Belt, and then everything will just lock in. And so that's one of my commitments. It's part of the Ward 9 Dream Network, and we're definitely trying to get there. Do we want to talk about another thing that sort of happened very quickly was the realization that we needed to make sanitizer, and you guys are all basically sanitizer factories if you change a couple things. And I know Annex jumped into the game very early. I don't know if you guys experimented with sanitizer, but maybe Andrew, you can talk about your experience making sanitizer.
I'm happy to do so. It's we're glad we did it. I don't think I would ever do it again. Very tough, very dangerous, but we're thrilled that we were given the opportunity to do that. And so obviously at the very beginning, sanitizer was running out. It kind of felt like back in March and April of 2020 that the global supply chains were just breaking down. People couldn't get what they needed, and that was especially true for personal protective equipment. And we just kind of realized one night that, we make alcohol, there's distilleries in the area. We can work together to start producing ethanol, to start, effectively making our own little local supply. And this whole idea really picked up speed fast. So we had our first kind of tests ready to go, and then the fire department stopped in and they said, you guys are going to blow yourselves up, which was probably true. So, we had to do a lot of working with the city and the fire department to make sure that this process was safe. And honestly, we were writing the book on this while we were doing it. I was working with a great friend of mine at Raft Beer Labs, who's our quality assurance company. And he was writing papers on this and publishing them in academic brewers journals. And I was communicating with the city, and it got to the point that we were like bringing in well service companies with firefighters there to stand with us and make sure that, if something did go wrong, they were there to sort that out. And we had to work with our HVAC system. We ended up repurposing the makeup air unit for the restaurant, and so we could get the air exchanges that we need to be able to do this safely. And it really blew my mind what actually goes into this sort of production, but the city was there for it. And we had discussed what we were doing with a couple of counselors and a lot of different departments, but at a certain point, we had fire, mechanical, electrical, we had all of the different city inspectors at our place together, kind of late March, early April, trying to figure out how to get sanitizer out to the Calgary market because no one was able to make this. And that felt really good. And it was so amazing to see the cooperation from the city, trying to figure out like how to allow business to supply Calgary with the products that they needed. So we couldn't have been happier with how that went.
Awesome. I mean, and that was a great news story. I can tell you, one of the roles that I've played through the pandemic is chair of the Calgary's Emergency Management Committee. And so I was right there with the mayor and the chief of emergency management. Started with Tom Sanson, moved on to Sue Henry. Tom retired, but an amazing sort of centralization of function. And it was very clear to us that we had to help businesses pivot. We had to create new supply chains. We had to do all of those things. And it was fabulous to have a private sector partner sort of step up and innovate. And I see that as one of the silver linings of COVID. I was there in the flood when we dropped everything and just got the city moving again. And the question was, how do we take that disaster and learn to do business as usual in that very fluid way? And I think that helped us in COVID. That helped us get the microbreweries up and running, and then that also helped us sort of innovate further through COVID.
We realized going through this just like how important local manufacturing is to our economy, because global supply chains can and do sometimes break down. So it's so important to make sure that we can be self-sufficient as a city, and that was one thing that COVID really taught us.
I 100% believe that, if we are going to survive and thrive long into an uncertain future, we've got to, grow the things that we eat. We've got to make the things that we use closer to home. 10 years ago, there was a guy named James Howard Kunstler who said that the age of the 10,000-mile Caesar salad is coming to an end. And, there's something to be said for that the idea that you create great jobs and great production and craft approach. And I think that that's what we're going to see as we start to build the new economies that drive us forward, is that sort of that micro distributed capacity. And as an Italian, I see that in places like Italy too, where they just they make everything they use, and they grow everything they eat, and they brew everything and vint everything that they drink, and it's a skill set that endures. Talking about Italy and talking about Europe, something that I've been pushing for is sort of like a shift to a more European approach to life as we move outside, as we celebrate our park spaces, and sort of maybe a rejection of some of the more puritanical roots that characterize at least public consumption of alcohol and things like that. As and when I started to move that idea forward, I was attacked by some members of council saying that that was anti-business because allowing people to drink in parks would be bad for your businesses because you wanted them in your tap rooms. As local entrepreneurs in the brewery space, what was your response to the idea of opening up where we drink and how we drink in public and our relationship to alcohol in a more casual way?
I think it's a great move. I mean, from the business side, obviously, you know, making it great. I mean, you can't ignore that, you know, alcohol is alcohol, and there's definitely issues, and there needs to be caution around that. But I think this sort of prohibition at sort of any level of sort of restricting it and sort of putting these rules, that's something that we've been going against. I mean, that's why there was production minimums. If you look at AGLC and ALCB, whatever the liquor board was prior to AGLC, like we had such strict rules, and it creates sort of this can't even think of the word that I'm trying to find at the moment.
The monopoly, or is it?
No, well, just like, you know, it's like putting the cookie jar on top of the fridge. You know, there are things, people are still drinking in public, and people are still finding corners in the park, or whether it's an alley, and leaving their cans behind. Whereas if there's sort of some guidelines for everyone, and, you know, we can make it happen, I think it's great for the city. It brings a lot of value to our outdoor spaces and parks, and just creates, yeah, a more comfortable place for everyone.
Andrew or Graham, you want to jump in on this?
Yeah, I would just echo your comment from before, GC, about the clientele or the customers that we all have coming through our breweries. These are not, you know, college kids looking to get drunk. These are families. These are professionals. These are all sorts of well-natured people. I mean, none of us have bouncers, yet we essentially run bars. And it's just allowing that same group of people to enjoy a beer in a park with their friends just seems natural to me. I lived overseas for a couple of years in Europe, and it's really nice. But I guess you have to, the people drinking in parks and in public have to treat it with the respect that it deserves. You have to take it seriously. You can't let it get out of hand. And I think the public in general can be trusted with that based on what we've seen here.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I also think that like just the destigmatization that comes with, you know, certainly that's involved in alcohol use, of which we have to deal with all the time. And campaigns like moving it out into a more public forum and trusting the public with their own drug consumption is important. Drug and alcohol consumption. I think that's true of all drugs. And yeah, I truly promote kind of getting rid of any sort of prohibition around that.
So Andrew, you know, there's the other side to it, which is of course harm reduction. And I think Ben was talking about the idea that if you turn alcohol consumption into a taboo, then it hides in dark nooks and crannies. And if you make it part of a life worth living, and it's not about excess, and it's just about, and I'll tell you, you know, my own experience was I used to hate beer. Like I couldn't understand why people like beer. And then I drank craft beer and I was like, now I get it. You know, when I go to Italy and we drink wine from, you know, vineyards all around us, and you know, the fact that it's made locally by people who, you know, are part of a long tradition, and it's got an amazing, to have that connection to, you know, our diet here in Calgary, you know, the fact that we make all of that, it just makes so much sense. And it just seems to me part of a life worth living. But there is a dark side. And, you know, COVID-19, with all of the restrictions we put on it, you know, claimed a lot of Albertans and a lot of Canadians' lives, and a lot of people around the world. In Alberta, though, the opioid pandemic killed more people. The opioid crisis killed more people than COVID-19 did over the span of COVID. And more people died from alcoholism in that time as well. And so there's a dark side to this. And I know that Annex Ales at least is involved to a certain extent with harm reduction. You want to talk to us a little bit about that, Andrew?
So we work with a company or a not-for-profit called Each and Every, and it's businesses that support harm reduction with the ultimate goal of talking with provincial and federal governments and even municipal governments about better policy around drugs and alcohol to make sure that things are safe. And immediately people come to us, are like, how do you support this? You sell drugs and alcohol. But at the end of the day, we work in this framework that is, it's regulated. We have to print, the strength of the drugs that we sell on the cans. So it's regulated servings, it's regulated strength. It's done in a regulated setting. I don't think it's too far of a stretch to consider brewery tap rooms comparable to safe injection sites, in that we have people supervising the people that are actively consuming. And beer's food, and beer's a great experience, and we want people to have a great experience, but this always has to be done safely. And we know that we can control how it's being done safely in our own space. And if it's not being done in our space, or not being drank in our space, it's in its house or even a park, we know that the quality control that we put in place, that's legislated to make us put that in place, is going to help people keep people safe, because they can monitor their dosage, they can monitor their consumption. They know that it's clean, they know that it's pure. Like, if we were finding opioids in beer, this would be a very different conversation.
Anyone else want to jump in on that?
No, just echoing Andrew's comments. We're really proud to be a member of Each and Every as well, and I think it's doing a great job. The work being done by Ewan and Each and Every's and all the businesses as part of it has been great, sort of highlighting the importance of safe consumption and the roles that, as Andrew said, breweries play in that as well.
So, I mean, when I initially dropped my notice of motion saying it's time to do a pilot and talk about how we might start loosening our approach to consumption of alcohol in public spaces like parks, I got a lot of support. But I did hear from the Indigenous community saying, it would have been nice to have a consultation with us, because public drunkenness is something that dogs us. As it's a trope about, it's a racist trope about Indigenous people. And I love the idea of a nice white family sitting, and opening a box of Una pizza and having a beer, in a park in Bridgeland. But is everybody experiencing the same? Is everyone having opportunity to have the same kind of experience? Similarly, when I was advocating for the 42nd Avenue multi-use path, the mayor did say to me, who is this for, Gian-Carlo? The Barley Belt, and and I was like, well, it's getting people safely to their jobs in Highfield and Manchester, but it's also providing a tourist arm and a safe arm for people to get to the microbreweries. And he's like, well, who are these people? And and I joked with him. I said, well, we'll open a couple more yoga studios and places where people can get lattes along 42nd. Because I was hearing what his criticism was, and I noted at the beginning of this, conversation, the fact that we're a bunch of white guys. How do you see, your industry, what you're contributing to the city, as being something for everyone, or is this just sort of like a bougie thing to do?
I think craft beer.
It's a tough question. Thanks for jumping in, Andrew.
Very much so. Craft beer in itself is, we're constantly struggling with the concepts of diversity, equity, and inclusion. I think as things progress, some of the better breweries are starting to release statements. They're starting to revamp their hiring policies. They're starting to revamp their social media presence. Make sure that there's representation of all different sorts of people that come in on their social media. I mean, hopefully that apply for our jobs and come to work with us. And at the end of the day, that should, and we hope that translates to people coming to our businesses. And we're looking for a more diverse and equitable and inclusive business. And I'm really hoping at the same time all of those people want to use bicycles. Like, we want everyone coming here on a bike. We love it. We love the safe act of transport. And I hope that there's some sort of like snowball connection that goes with that. But it's up to every single business, not just breweries, every single business to really address, how they deal with their own diversity, equity, and inclusion.
It's a challenge, and I think it's all our responsibility to make an effort in it. We had a big opportunity when we expanded to 110 seats. And coming out of COVID, we had to hire 15 people. And I early on had a conversation with my taproom manager. I said, no more bearded dudes, and we're not going to go down that road anymore, because I think that's what breweries tended to attract, and that those were certainly people who are interested in working in our small tap room. But with our larger space and our restaurant, we've made a solid effort to be as diverse and as equitable as possible, and it's working. And it's always at the forefront of our hiring process.
Yeah, we were like any brewer, I think over the last 18 months especially, there's been a much needed sort of microscope brought to the industry about a lack of diversity. And we've been lucky to be working with some consultants and stuff. And there's so much sort of, I guess, no-brainers, sort of easy things that a lot of craft breweries have fallen into, and we haven't been perfect at all. And just reassessing, hiring processes and making sure we're a welcoming space for everyone, and work with the industry to do more than lip service and make changes.
I'll tell you, my re-election campaign is, I was deeply moved because, I helped move gender equity and diversity forward. I was right there supporting truth and reconciliation. And when COVID struck, and I think that's one of the great innovations of COVID, we were talking about how COVID accelerated things. I think understanding that we're all in this together, I think helped drive the Black Lives Matter protests around the world. And we brought that into City Hall. We had a very difficult conversation about systemic racism. And so I'm running on, my first leading value in this re-election campaign is a city for everyone, an equitable city, an anti-racist Calgary. And I'm very interested in, celebrating the diversity we have, and we'll be doing more conversations about more diverse things in craft beer. But I'm also very interested in figuring out how to, share that wealth across boundaries. Really quickly, still on this topic, India Pale Ale. We're starting to call them American Pale Ales and stuff like that. It's considered an instrument of colonialism. Is that gonna be something that we retire from our lexicon or not?
I guess you could go with the Imperial Pale Ale, but again, the word Imperial doesn't have a great connotation either.
That doesn't help, right?
I didn't really move the needle much on that one.
The subjugating Pale Ale.
That's a really good point. I think there's probably some room to move the nomenclature around that beer style a little bit.
So we're sort of at the end of our hour. I think this has been a great conversation. I've really enjoyed it. I want to give you guys all an opportunity for some last thoughts. I want to, before I do that, I just want to note about public consumption in parks. On Sunday, the 18th, I'm hosting a disc golf tournament, sort of like a fundraiser for the people. And we're going to set up a disc golf course in Ellison Park, because disc golf has exploded throughout the city. It's exploded throughout the world with COVID. It was already a fast growing sport. Now we see, the number of people of color and the percentage of women playing has exploded through COVID. Families are playing. And so we're going to set up a disc golf course, not in a normal disc golf place, because we don't want to compete with the people who are already disc golfing. And we're going to have food there. Jane Bond Barbecue is going to serve food. And we wanted to have a little beer garden, but we don't have the ability to do that yet. And that's something that I really want to get to, where you can sort of have these ephemeral beer gardens show up for events and stuff like that in our park spaces. But that's my closing thought. I want to ask you for your closing thoughts, and I want you to do your colleagues in the industry a solid, not including yourselves. I want to hear your 3 favorite breweries in town, hopefully Ward 9. Obviously, number 1 are yourselves, but there's a lot of great people doing a lot of great work, and I wanted to have everybody in this conversation. I chose you guys, so let's spread the love a little bit. Why don't we start with Andrew?
So we're not picking guys in this conversation, right?
Yeah, you're not allowed to.
Okay,
I'm not allowing it.
Okay. My favorite breweries in the city are Establishment, our neighbors right next door, Cabin, real close to us, and Bourne, Colorado. Again, 3 businesses that we work very close with. They are doing great things for the community, and we're thrilled to have them in the Barley Belt.
Any closing thoughts beyond that, Andrew?
I'm looking forward to this election. I hope I hope everything goes well. I hope we move the needle forward for a more progressive Calgary with much more forward-thinking vision. And I really wish you all the best, GC.
Thank you so much. We'll be by many times this summer and on an official campaign event at some point. Thanks for doing everything you do. Graham, closing thoughts and your 3 faves, not including these 3 here.
My 3 favorites. So I would say I would echo Bourne, Colorado. Wade was in here early days asking for a lot of advice, and he's really built something great down there. I've always been a fan of Zero Issue up in the Northeast. They're making some great, everything they do is great. And Revival Brewcade in Inglewood is doing some really good small batch stuff. And I really miss pinball. It was one of my favorite things to do before COVID. So can't wait to get back there. Also a very honorable mention to Confluence Distilling. They're doing some great gins and a really good vodka that's local and fun. And then closing thoughts, I would just like to thank you, the rest of council, and the entire city and the AGLC for pivoting and changing through the last year and a half. We went through a full development permit and a full building permit for the expansion. It was all online. It was all digital. I hope that never changes. That process is very, very smooth. I didn't have to go to City Hall at all, which is great.
We're going to go back. Actually, after COVID is over, everything's going to be on papyrus.
That's the paper.
To hire a scribe.
But it was great. I always got the support I needed, and so thank you.
No, thank you. All right, Benjamin, anchor leg.
Yeah. So my 3 I chose, I think, are 3 for different reasons. Obviously, we got 88 just down the block from us. Have been just great partners and great neighbors. Borrowing a cup of sugar and stuff like that. When your hops don't make it on time and stuff like that. So they've been great, and they're making some really tasty beers. Love it. Heathens Brewing, the gluten-free brewery up in the Northeast. My son got diagnosed with celiac just before COVID, and it's nice to know I have a brewery to ship him off to when he turns 18 to work at, even if he can't work at mine. And the beers, it's really cool to see a gluten-free brewery doing some really interesting stuff and some sort of modern craft styles, and not just like a rice beer and just leaving it at that. And then my sort of home field across the river of Two Pillars, great little tasting room, doing some fun Belgian stuff, a short bike ride or walk from my house. So I've been seeing a lot of those guys, and it's really nice to see sort of something like that happening across the river and everything. So those are the 3 on my list currently, but it's pretty tough choosing favorites, I think, with whatever 40 plus breweries in the city at this point. Even removing 2 other ones out of the equation, it's tough. But and final thoughts. It just like the guy said, it's been a great ride working with the city over the last 6-7 years and seeing how the city's gotten behind our industry and small business in general. And yeah, really hoping come October we see sort of this progressive vision continue, and sort of the open ears to help us give back to the community and be here and grow our industry and everything else, arts and culture in the city. So best of luck in October.
Well, thank you so much. Thanks for spending time with me today. I really enjoyed this conversation. I hope you can spare some time next Sunday and experience the sport of disc golf, either with your families or as a team building exercise with some of your staff. It's a disc golf tournament for the people, and you can sign up at Carra, the number 4, Ward, the number 9.ca. I'm just so proud of what's happening in Ward 9. You know, you talk about all these great breweries, 70 to 80% of the breweries and distilleries in the city of Calgary are in Ward 9. My hashtags for this election, of course, are Carra for Ward 9, hashtag East Calgary, and most importantly, hashtag Rise Together YYC, because, you know, as we recover and as we build a great city together, it has to be for all of us. That's the Canadian dream. And I'm really excited by everything we have going on. So as you say, it's going to be a really important election, and I think it's going to go one of two ways. So I encourage everyone to identify the candidates that are going to push us forward rather than drag us back. And we're going to have minimum 11 new members of council. So it's just going to be crazy turnover, and it's exciting to have all kinds of fresh faces, but we also need some legacy. We need some veteran strength on the roster, and hopefully I'll be able to provide that. Hopefully I'm successful, but thank you for everything you do, and looking forward to seeing you throughout the summer and fall as we go about our great lives in this great city. Thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers.